and welcome to Your Coaching Journey, a podcast for doctors about coaching. Whether you're a coaching doctor, a doctor who is learning to coach, or a doctor who'd like to build coaching into your professional life, then this is the podcast for you.
Hi, I'm Helen Leathers, and with me today is my podcast co-host and business partner, Tom Dillon. Good morning, Tom.
Good morning, Helen. How are you?
I'm okay, thank you. I want to say, firstly, thank you for holding the fort for me over the last couple of episodes. And secondly, it's very good to be back.
It's good to have you back.
Pete says we're just back to making fun of each other.
Yeah. It was very strange talking to myself for 2 weeks. Which is weird, because Pete was in radio and just talked to himself all of the time.
Yeah.
That's his whole life. But
I
for
think
me,
he still does sometimes.
Yeah, I didn't fare well with talking to myself. I had to have the image of you on the screen in front of me.
No, you sound weird.
Someone to talk to. But it worked. And we got a couple of podcasts out and I was quite pleased with them in the end. But good to be back to our normal format.
Absolutely.
Have you in the room with me.
So I'm okay. How does it feel for you to be back face to face with me instead of having me on a screen?
I'm pleased.
Good. What are we going to be talking about today then?
Today, we're going to be talking about coaching around difficult conversations.
Okay, so this is a topic that I know you're quite fond of in many ways.
I'm not particularly fond of having difficult conversations.
No, but you have run many a workshop with organisations and individuals around difficult conversations.
Yeah, and I think it's something that comes up in my coaching a lot. I'd like to say all of the time, but it's not all of the time. But I think the majority of coaching that I have will at some stage involve someone having a difficult conversation with someone else. Because if there's things that they want, they're probably going to have to ask for those. So whether that's kind of a change in their working arrangements or they're just annoyed with someone else and haven't told them about it. So quite often that's a good coaching room is a good space for people to air their thoughts about other people, to tell their story about what's going on.
Yeah, and I've run these workshops as well. And also I've noticed that people will come into the coaching space and say, I really need to say this. And then the next line is really interesting. They say, but I don't like conflict. And I'm always struck with something that you said many, many years ago, and it stayed with me and I use it now. I've stolen it. You said, is it conflict or is it just a difficult conversation? And that is such a powerful question and really, I think, makes people stop and think.
Yeah. Yeah, because it generally isn't conflict, is it?
No.
There's no punching people or...
Hopefully not. It's just some discomfort there.
And to be fair, there's very little chance that it would end up in physical violence. There's very few difficult conversations that end up that way. Probably the worse it gets is someone standing up, walking out and slamming a door. That's probably about as violent as it gets. But
yeah.
If it's done well, that shouldn't happen. But I think that's the fear for people, is that they might... Well, we'll talk about why they might not have difficult conversations. And a question that I quite often ask in my coaching, which I suppose is a little bit leading, but it tends to stem from them talking about there's something going on and they've not addressed it. So they've talked about the problem. And I will say, what conversations have you had about this? And generally speaking, people don't have conversations about it. They just sit there moaning about it.
So they've just really been having the conversation in their head over and over.
Well, not even going there. They've just been... Sometimes they're quite attached to the situation, to them feeling like the victim maybe in the situation, or feeling hard done by in some way. So they will come and they will moan about the situation and how awful it is, but don't actually do anything about it.
Almost as if, who would they be if the situation wasn't problematic?
Yes, because then there wouldn't be a story to tell.
Yes.
It's that need for significance, isn't it? When we're feeling hard done by, it can make us feel quite significant, that we're important, that it's impacting us.
Yeah, and especially if friends, family sympathise, and it's, it serves some sort of purpose in a way.
Yeah. And I'll get people, well, not so much in the coaching room, but my daughter's a great one for coming into talking about her work situation and moaning about it, but not actually doing anything about it. Fortunately, she's now on maternity leave, having had my beautiful grandson, Magnus. So, yeah, we don't hear that anymore.
No. So that's something new since we were last together, isn't it? That on the podcast.
It is, yeah.
Baby
I did
Magnus.
mention it whilst I was on my own. So, yes, baby Magnus has arrived.
Yeah.
So he's beautiful. So that's lovely. So when I visit my daughter now, we have lovely conversations about baby stuff rather than about work stress and other people.
Mm.
And my daughter's, it's interesting because my daughter's quite an extrovert. She likes being around people. But it's that stress that it's the friction, isn't it, that comes with being around other people. Mm. We like the payoff, but there's some friction that comes too. And that's generally where we end up with the need for difficult conversations, because there's some friction that goes on.
Or some storytelling, perhaps.
Or some storytelling.
In our own minds.
Yeah. And actually thinking about my daughters, you know that I've had a couple of instances recently where I thought I was going to have a difficult conversation with my daughter about things that have happened and that I've got slightly put out by. And in the end, didn't have the difficult conversations. Because there wasn't actually need to. There was a story being told in my head.
You'd made something.
I'd made something up. Circumstance led me to tell that story, but it was just a story. And actually, as time went on and I didn't have the difficult conversation, it kind of resolved itself.
And that's really interesting because that segues quite nicely into something I was going to say. We have choices when it comes to difficult conversations. Yeah. And one is to literally avoid the conversation. Yeah. And in that situation, avoiding it meant more information came forward to you and you went, oh, yeah, that's not a thing. Yeah. I'm making that up.
Yeah. And so the gathering of data is one of the important things to do when we're going to have a difficult conversation, and not just fly off the handle because something has happened. And in that particular circumstance, it would have been very easy for me to fly off the handle. I don't fly off the handle. It's not my style. But I could have done. And that could have been not great for our relationship. And especially, she's just had a baby and I was being unreasonable in my head. Yes. But not outwardly. So I saved myself from my unreasonableness. But I say that's interesting, is it? So let's think about difficult conversations. How good do you think, on a scale of 1 to 10, Helen, on a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is I'm rubbish at difficult conversations and 10 is no, I'm brilliant at difficult conversations, where would you put yourself?
Oh, gosh. So difficult conversations overall, having them or avoiding them? Well,
that was going to be my other question. But I thought, well, let's start with when you come to have them. How good are you at having them?
When I come to have them, I don't know. I think I'm still got a lot of room for improvement on this. And I think probably I would be kind to myself and give myself a 7.
Oh, that's good. That's much better than I would give myself.
Oh, now I feel like I'm bigging myself up.
So, and let's get back to that difference then. So in terms of your style, your approach to difficult conversations, where are you? Maybe it's useful to use Thomas and Kilman's conflict styles as a kind of thinking about how...
I don't need to think about it. I avoid them. I absolutely avoid them. Yeah. But I've got better. So... this pulls in a lot of the things that we've talked about in the past, about what we've learnt growing up and all of that. And I know that conflict discussion, difficult conversations were never something we had in our house. And then I went into a marriage where those difficult conversations didn't happen either. Yeah. And because my ex-husband didn't have those conversations in his family growing up. So we literally never argued. We were together for 21 years and we never argued. Yeah. And now looking back, I think that's not good.
No.
Because that meant, not that you want to invite an argument, but we didn't ever have difficult conversations and we were both avoidant of them. And it's only since getting divorced that I've learnt to have better conversations and better difficult conversations. But if possible, I will still avoid them if it's at all possible. But the other day I was talking within my family and there was a discussion about, maybe if I need to get out of this scenario. I could just tell this story. And I actually was the one that said, oh, we could just leave. And, you know, we talked it through, and their style was clearly that they wanted to appease and have an excuse. And
so thinking about Thomas and Kilman's conflict styles model, which is, we're not talking about conflict, but we're just talking about difficult conversations, but I think it's useful. So at one extreme, we have accommodating, not necessarily avoidant, accommodating, where you just agree with everything anyone else says. So you just go along with it. So which is kind of the weakest position to be in. It's quite collaborative, but it's it's very, you give everything away, don't you? If you're you don't get your needs met.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then there's the avoidant, which is obviously not collaborative or assertive. It's just, you know, avoiding it. But in some ways that could be quite assertive by avoiding it. It's like if we receive an email from someone and we think, yeah, that's maybe not for us. You could just avoid the email for a few days and then it gets resolved.
Yes.
So sometimes it's tactical to avoid. So because the problem might go away.
Let's say that I'm tactical then. I think that sounds good.
No. And then we have compromising, which is collaborative, a bit more assertive, but you're still giving something away. It could end up as a lose-lose. No one's happy.
Yeah.
Or it could be win-win if everyone is. Yeah. But sometimes it is lose-lose. And then we have collaborating, where we are cooperating, we are trying to come to some mutual agreement that's beneficial, a win-win situation. And then we have competing, which is a win-lose. So I win, you lose. And so in sort of power structures, that would be how generally difficult conversations would go, isn't it? Well, you do that or I sack you.
Yeah. That can be a bit more combative, can't it, in a way?
Yeah, but if you've got the power, it doesn't matter, does it? It's not a difficult conversation for the person with the power.
No, it's a difficult conversation for the person without the power.
Yeah, they lose.
Yeah.
So those are the 5 recognised conflict styles. And as you've said, you are avoidant and maybe accommodating. And they do tend to go hand in hand, the avoidant accommodating.
But I think in realising and first of all, in realising that concept that it's not conflict, it's just a difficult conversation. And, you know, doing a lot of work on me as a person and understanding how to have better conversations, I think that I have improved when I do need to have those conversations, that I can, you know, have them in a way that I don't always get the words out right. I don't always do it as I'd rehearsed in my head and all of those things, but I feel that I am improving on having those when I need to.
Yeah, and I think having the conversation well is important, but I think more important is for you to have the conversation for yourself. So it doesn't particularly matter what the consequence is, the fact that you've had your needs met in terms of having your say, of being assertive, of giving your opinion, letting the other person know what's going on for you, I think shows your self-respect, doesn't it?
Yeah, and I think that's really important. If someone is thinking, oh, I had a conversation and it went badly, well done you for having the conversation.
Yeah.
And what can you take from that and what can you learn from that, maybe going forward?
Yeah. So I think avoiding the conversation is one tactic. We'll call it a tactic, but it's generally not helpful. But there are 3 ways, I think, and we've talked about 2 of them. So we could avoid the conversation, we could have the conversation badly, or we could have the conversation well. And I think there's some work to do to get to, and there's some strategies that we can use to get to the point of having the conversation well. But I think in terms of avoidant, it's useful to think about, actually, we had this happen the other day. We were at a conference where the subject of difficult conversations was brought up, and part of the format of the workshop session was to have a chat with someone about a conversation that you've not had, that you could have. It would be good to have, but you've not had. And we kind of ended up in a bit of a trio, didn't we? So there was a lady talking to us who said, well, yeah, there is this conversation, but just giving it some thought now, I don't think it's a conversation that I need to have. And that's okay. And I just asked her, so what are the consequences of you not having the conversation? And she thought for a while and then said, yeah, it's probably going to end up much worse further down the line. And I said, so it sounds as though you've decided not to have the conversation, but there are going to be consequences if you don't have it. And she went, yeah. So, and that was all. It wasn't a coaching session. It was just an off the cuff sort of workshop conversation. But I think it's very easy for us to talk ourselves out of having the conversation.
Yes. They could say, Tom says this is a tactic. I'm going to avoid the conversation, but actually need to have that conversation.
I think it doesn't take much for us to take the easy way out, does it?
No.
To avoid where we can.
Especially if you still see that difficult conversation as a conflict.
Yeah. But obviously the conflict exists in your head already.
Yeah.
There is something that is amiss, something that you would like to be different. And so the cost of not having a conversation is that the status quo is maintained. And that for this lady, she said it'd be worse down the line. So maybe the status quo wasn't going to be maintained and it was going to get worse over time. But actually, yeah, it could be that it just carries on. It rumbles on as it is and you stay silent, accepting whatever is going on. And it might not be terribly serious, but it could be quite serious. It could be that you are being disadvantaged in some way and that isn't being addressed.
Yeah. I did once have a conversation in a workplace where back in the day, as some of our listeners will probably remember, where there was they were allowed smoking in the building. And
you're going back a long way.
Oh, I know. And they were supposed to only smoke in certain rooms and they left the doors open and it was just awful. And I hadn't been aware of the situation when I'd taken the role on, and I really kind of got myself, I rallied all my energy and I went in to have this conversation and said, I don't think this is acceptable. And if nothing's done about it, then I'll leave. And they said, oh, we're sorry to see you go. And so you do have to be prepared for consequences.
Well, yes, but I think what was your goal in the conversation? That's where we get to, isn't it? What did you want to see?
Had thought it through, really. Had thought it through.
And that's when we come on to talk about having the conversation well, it's being clear about what you want from the conversation.
But going back to what we said earlier, I was dead proud of myself.
Yeah, no,
I mean, I was a bit shaky.
You were out of work.
I was out of work and a bit shaky going home. But I was dead proud of myself. So there we go.
There is a risk in having a difficult conversation.
Yes.
We're going back to what you were saying earlier about upbringing. So I think our household was quite... I had three sisters. My middle sister was quite combative, so there were lots of arguments in the house. But my dad was it was his house and his rules, so you couldn't argue with him. So actually conflict with him could end up in violence. So that kind of my avoidance. We're both avoidant. My sort of avoidance came from that, but only with certain people. So with other people, I'd be quite happy to argue with. But I think he taught me not to argue, which is a shame because he was very argumentative. So that's interesting. And then, and what my mum would do was kind of appease, really, accommodate and go along with most things. I mean, she'd occasionally bite back, but most of the time she would be accommodating. And then in my marriage, I think I learned that if I argued, my ex-wife would get upset and then go quiet for a couple of days. So I kind of learned not to argue to avoid the upset. So there was definitely a learned script there. And that's, when my mum died and I had some counselling and they said, I can't talk about my relationship as you do in counselling. And they said, do you argue a lot? And I go, no, don't do that. And they, oh, why is that? And I, well, because she gets upset. So that became a pattern. So I think there are ways of being in relationships and that could be workplace relationships where it just becomes a script that gets played out all of the time. So, yeah. So I started, after my counselling, I changed the script and started arguing again.
And a difficult conversation doesn't have to be an argument, does it?
No. And it wasn't, I was just being more assertive, I think, after that.
Yeah. It's funny talking, because I know I said I probably wasn't that good at difficult conversations years ago, but as we're talking, a memory of another conversation came back to me. And I think what's interesting is, for me, when it was really important to me, I was able to step into that place and have that conversation. And when I was being potentially moved into a role as the sort of second in command on a second in command, that makes it sound grand, but, into another team, the team leader was the person that got the job that I went for, but she wanted me in her team. And I knew she only wanted me in her team because the other person that was going to be in the team instead, she didn't like. And she'd never really shown me any niceties or anything in the past. And I said I wasn't going to take the role, and everyone thought I was the worst person in the world. They couldn't understand why I'd suddenly stood up for myself. And I think that's quite interesting and quite telling, when people who haven't had difficult conversations in the past seemingly suddenly have difficult conversations. And that can be really interesting in terms of how people react around them.
Yeah. And certainly if you've built up a script and you suddenly change the script and go, oh no, well, actually, I'm going to change the way I behave, that can be a shock to people and can be very unsettling.
Yeah.
So in some ways, I'm going to talk about avoiding the ambush later, but in some ways, in changing the script and behaving in a different way, you're almost ambushing them, because they're, whoa, what's going on here?
Yeah.
So I think the danger is, if we do avoid conversations and accept the status quo and stay silent, it can start to fester and it can become more of a thing, and we just grumble along and we build up points on our stress card, and we just end up cashing them in at some point, and that could be going from silence to violence. And not violence in it, but an outburst rather than a measured conversation.
Yeah.
I think that's the danger of avoidance.
Yeah.
If the situation doesn't change and you get more and more frustrated by it, then at some point it's going to come out. And you quite often see this in sport. Actually, there's a lovely interview that Alistair Campbell did with Andrew Bolton. Adam Bolton. Back in the time when Labour in power, they'd been in power for 12 years or so. And obviously we're going to lose power. It was the morning after the election and there was no definite results. But so Alistair Campbell, they were both being interviewed by someone else. And Alistair Campbell started having a go at Adam Bolton, saying, well, of course you want the Tories to win. And Adam Bolton was getting more and wound up. And there was some history between them of difficult, tetchy interviews. And at some point, Adam Bolton just snaps in the interview, live interview, and went, don't you tell me what I think. You always do this. And it just became a real, wow, that was interesting. So I think, you can see it happening. And in sport, it quite often happens. There was a famous World Cup match where Zinedine Zidane had been wound up by another player. And I think he was making inappropriate remarks about his sister or his mother, something, just niggling at him. And eventually, famously, Zinedine Zidane headbutted him in the chest, which is a bit strange, but so just suddenly launched at him. So just, again, that snapping. So we don't, in real life, in normal life, we don't want to get to that point where we snap, because that's not helpful.
No. We want to have those conversations earlier and have them better. Yeah.
I was thinking about the film American Beauty. And that's about one of those dynamics in a marriage where she's constantly putting the husband down. And there's this famous sort of scene over dinner where she suddenly, she's having a go at him again, and he's giving his job up, and she's having a real go at him, and he picks his dinner plate up and suddenly throws it at the wall. So it's that sudden change, isn't it, from being accommodating, avoidant, to suddenly being aggressive.
Yeah.
Which is not helpful. And generally doesn't allow us to win the argument.
No, almost
because then the conversation is about your behaviour rather than about what the original.
By jumping to that aggressive state, even if it's through frustration, you've lost already almost, haven't you?
Yeah.
So hopefully we can encourage people to have some better conversations and not get to that point of breaking.
Yeah.
And that's often what people come to coaching to discuss.
They do. As Aristotle once said.
Okay.
Anyone can be angry. That's easy. But to be angry with the right person at the right time for the right purpose and in the right way is hard.
Yeah. As is remembering that whole quote. That's a long quote. Well done.
But yeah, and it is very easy to get angry, isn't it? And to shout and scream, but it doesn't tend to win the argument. And as I say, can end up in a conversation about something completely different. So we have to, if we're going to have a difficult conversation, we have to, for ourselves, try and take the emotion out of it and come to that conversation when we are in a relax is probably the wrong word, but a calm state.
Yeah.
So a bit of preparation around that. I don't think it's useful to wait until, that moment when you've suddenly snapped is not the right time to be having the conversation.
No. And I think we all are aware of times when something happens that triggers that emotional response, that adrenaline release, and we can sort of see red or feel that we want to, fight or flee.
Well, the fight or flight response.
And that's when we've talked about it before, I'm sure, numerous times, when our rational brain isn't always in control. But we do want to calm that down before we have those conversations.
Yeah, fight or flight is not a good place to be when you... And that's the problem with our physiology, isn't it? That we do, when we become emotional, when we get angry or afraid, then we do go to that fight. Our body tenses. All that physiology is going... Like our breath suddenly becomes shallower. Our heart's racing. All of that stuff is going on. And we're noticing that. And it's very difficult not to react to that, whatever is going on for us.
We might not even be noticing it. We might just be reacting.
Yeah. But there is that in Viktor Frankl, the Swiss psychologist, his notion that between stimulus and response, there's a gap. Mm-hmm. And what we choose to do in that gap gives us our freedom. So there is a pause. There is time. As much as it is there in our head, there is time before we react to just pause and let the adrenaline run out of us. And I think it was, what's her name? Jill Bolt Taylor, who has the notion that the adrenaline takes about 90 seconds to run through our body and then it's gone. And if we can stop telling ourselves the story, then it should be out of our system. So, and I'm not suggesting you wait 90 seconds and then have the conversation. It's still better to go away and think about it. But it's, So we don't have to have the conversation in the moment when we're angry.
So I'm just aware of time, and I'm wondering if we perhaps can wrap up and give our listeners something to take away from this episode, and then next episode come back and talk about the mechanics of that difficult conversation.
Yes. It's our first podcast back, isn't it? And we've been a bit chatty.
We've been very chatty, yeah.
And talk about life.
Yeah.
Relationships. So I think for me, it's recognizing that if there is a difficult conversation in your life that you're not having, to recognize the cost of not having the conversation. There will be a cost to you. And that's probably stress. That it takes an awful lot of emotional energy to not have a difficult conversation because it's constantly there. We're constantly thinking about it. We're constantly mentally preparing for it and then not having it. So just understanding that there will be a cost. Having said that, I think it's also useful to be aware of the stories that we tell ourselves and just to double check. And maybe this is the great thing about coaching, is that we can take our story into a coaching room, into a coaching conversation, tell the story and let someone play it back to us. And I had a great example of that with a lecturer who was given a promotion and very happy with his salary, but his boss told him there was a stipend attached to it and he'd get that at some point once he'd started. Anyway, the stipend never arrived, and he went back to his boss and said, I didn't get my stuff. And she said, I'll look into it. Went away, looked into it, came back, said, yeah, it doesn't exist anymore. You're not getting it. Now, it'd been done away with 2 years before. She was new to the organisation, didn't know this. She just read it somewhere that he was getting it. So he was up in arms, was going to take it all the way to the top, speak to the Vice-Chancellor. I was so angry about it all. And like, this is in the coaching room, he was angry. And so I just played back. It sounds like you've been promoted, you're happy with the salary, you've been promised a stipend by your boss who's new to the organisation. And that was done away with 2 years ago before you were even considered for the role. So it sounds like your boss just made a simple mistake. And you just went, yeah, you're right. And all the fight went away. Mm. So there was just a great example where coaching can address the storytelling. Now, that's not going to be true in every case, but it's a great example of where you can just play back what you're hearing. And in hearing it back, people will go, oh, yeah, because sometimes it doesn't make sense. So a bit like the lady that we were talking to at the conference. Well, I've decided I don't need to have that conversation. Yeah. So what are the consequences? Oh, well, this sounds like it might still be good to have the conversation.
Yeah. So it's definitely for our listeners to take away that exploration, but also for them to take it into the coaching space when clients come to them and say, oh, this is happening, to explore the cost of not having those conversations, to explore perhaps, as we've talked about, how they've dealt with difficult situations in the past and look at their strategies around that and whether it served them. And perhaps also, as we mentioned a little while ago, how is the difficult situation serving them in some way? Having that realization might also help to understand that we're holding on to the situation, avoiding the conversation.
And and there will be a payoff for them in some way, even if it's just a quiet life. Mm-hmm. There's an awful lot of marriages that just bobble along. A quiet life without people addressing what's really important. So just going back to Thomas and Kilman, so that we did a podcast on Thomas and Kilman back episode 22. So it's worth revisiting that and just having an understanding of, as a coach, I think having an understanding of that model and then being able to have that conversation with someone and give them a framework. Go, where do you sit on this? Where are you? It's really helpful. Good. Well done. We've waffled on for a long time. So
we'll be
welcome back. Thought I waffled on a lot on my own, but gosh, it's even worse with you around.
Thanks.
Let's finish there. Thank you for that, Helen.
And we'll come back next time and talk about the rest. Bye for now.
Bye-bye.
This has been a Monkey Pants Productions podcast.